Chapter 13, wherein we hear the beautiful Archangel Zita unfold her lofty designs and are shown the wings of Mirar, all moth-eaten in a cupboard. And thus, talking, the two archangels had reached the boulevard Ratchet as his eye lighted on a tavern, whence through the mist the light fell golden on the pavement. Theophil suddenly bethought himself of the Archangel Ithuriel, who, in the guise of a poor but beautiful woman, was living in wretched lodgings on La Butte, and came every evening to read the papers at this tavern. The musician often met her there. Her name was Zita. Theophil had never been curious enough to inquire into the opinions entertained by this archangel, but it was generally supposed that she was a Russian nihilist, and he took her to be, like Arcade, an atheist and a revolutionary. He had heard remarkable tales about her. People said she was an hermaphrodite, and that as the active and passive principles were united within her in a condition of stable equilibrium, she was an example of perfect being, finding in herself complete and continuous satisfaction, contented yet unfortunate in that she knew not desire. But, added Theophile, I have my doubts about it. I believe she's a woman and subject to love, like everything else that has life and breath in the universe. Besides, someone caught her one day kissing her hand to a strapping peasant fellow. He offered to introduce his companion to her. The two angels found her alone, reading. As they drew near, she lifted her great eyes, in whose deeps of molten gold little sparks of light were forever a dance. Her brows were contracted into that austere fold which we see on the forehead of the Pythian Apollo. Her nose was perfect and descended without a curve. Her lips were compressed and imparted a disdainful and supercilious air to her whole countenance. Her tawny hair, with its gleaming lights, was carelessly adorned with the tattered remnants of a huge bird of prey. Her garments lay about her in dark and shapeless folds. She was leaning her chin on a small, ill-tended hand. Arcade, who had but recently heard references made to this powerful archangel, showed her marked esteem and placed entire confidence in her. He immediately proceeded to tell of the progress his mind had made towards knowledge and liberty, of his lucubrations in the De Esparvu library, of his philosophical reading, his studies of nature, his works on exegesis, his anger and his contempt when he recognized the deception of the demiurge, his voluntary exile among mankind, and finally, of his project to stir up rebellion in heaven, ready to dare all against an insidious, an odious master whom he pursued with inextinguishable hatred. He expressed his profound happiness at finding in Ithuriel a mind capable of counseling and helping him in his great undertaking. You are not a very old hand at revolutions, said Zita, smiling. Nevertheless, she doubted neither his sincerity nor the firmness of his declared resolve, and she congratulated him on his intellectual audacity. That is what is most lacking in our people, she said. They do not think. And she added almost immediately, but on what can intelligence sharpen its wits in a country where the climate is soft and existence made easy? Even here, where necessity calls for intellectual activity, nothing is rarer than a person who thinks Nevertheless, replied Maurice's guardian angel, man has created science. The important thing is to introduce it into heaven. When the angels possess some notions of physics, chemistry, astronomy, and physiology, when the study of matter shows them worlds in an atom, and an atom in the myriads of planets, when they see themselves lost between these two infinities, when they weigh and measure the stars, analyze their composition, and calculate their orbits, they will recognize that these monsters work in obedience to forces which no intelligence can define, or that each star has its particular divinity, or indigenous god, and they will realize that the gods of Aldebaran, Betelgeuse, and Sirius are greater than Yaldabaoth. When, at length, they come to scrutinize with care the little world in which their lot is cast, and piercing the crust of the earth, note the gradual evolution of its flora and fauna, and the rude origin of man, who, under the shelter of rocks and in cave dwellings, had no god but himself. When they discover that, united by the bonds of universal kinship to plants, beasts, and men, they have successfully endued all forms of organic life, from the simplest and most primitive until they became at length the most beautiful of the children of light. They will perceive that Yaldabaoth, the obscure demon of an insignificant world lost in space, is imposing on their credulity when he pretends that they issued from nothingness at his bidding. They will perceive that he lies in calling himself the infinite, the eternal, the almighty, and that, so far from having created worlds, he knows neither their number nor their laws. They will perceive that he is like unto one of them. They will despise him, and shaking off his tyranny, will fling him into the Gehenna, where he has hurled those more worthy than himself. Do you think so? Murmured Zita, puffing out the smoke of her cigarette. Nevertheless, this knowledge, by virtue of which you reckon to enfranchise heaven, has not destroyed religious sentiment on earth. In countries where they have set up and taught this science of physics, of chemistry, astronomy, and geology, which you think capable of delivering the world, Christianity has retained almost all its sway. If the positive sciences have had such a feeble influence on the beliefs of mankind, it is not likely it will exercise a greater one on the opinions of the angels, and nothing is of such dubious efficacy as scientific propaganda. What? Exclaimed Arcane. You deny that science has given the church its death blow? Is it possible the church at any rate judges otherwise? Science, which you believe has no power over her, is redoubtable to her, since she prescribes it. From Galileo's dialogues to Monsieur Allard's little manuals, she has condemned all its discoveries, and not without reason. In former days, when she gathered within her fold all that was great in human thought, the church held sway over the bodies as well as over the souls of men, and imposed unity of obedience by fire and sword. Today her power is but a shadow, and elect among the great minds have withdrawn from her. And that is the state to which the science has reduced her. Possibly, replied the beautiful Archangel, but how slowly, with what vicissitudes, at the price of what efforts, of what sacrifices. Zita did not absolutely condemn scientific propaganda, but she anticipated no prompt or certain results from it. For her, it was not so much a question of enlightening the angels. The important thing was to enfranchise them. In her opinion, one only exerted a strong influence on individuals, whoever they might be, by rousing their passions and appealing to their interests. Persuade the angels that they will cover themselves with glory by overthrowing the tyrant, and that they will be happier once they are free. That is the most practical policy to attempt, and for my own part, I am devoting all my energies to its fulfillment. It is certainly no light task, because the kingdom of heaven is a military autocracy, and there is no public opinion in it. Nevertheless, I do not despair of starting an intellectual movement. I do not wish to boast, but no one is more closely acquainted than I with the different classes of angelic society. Throwing away her cigarette, Zita pondered for a moment. Then, amid the click of ivory balls on the billiard table, the clinking of glasses, the curt voices of the players announcing their points, the monotonous answers of the waiters to their customers, the Archangel enumerated the entire population of the spirits of light. We must not count the dominations, the virtues, nor the powers which compose the celestial lower middle class. I have no need to tell you, for you know it as well as I, how selfish, base, and cowardly the middle classes are. As to the great dignitaries, the ministers, the generals, thrones, cherubim, and seraphim, you know what they are. They will take no action. Let us, however, once prove ourselves the stronger, and we shall have them with us. For if autocrats do not readily acquiesce in their own downfall, once overthrown, all their forces recoil upon themselves. It will be well to work the army. Entirely loyal as the army is, it will allow itself to be influenced by a clever anarchist propaganda. But our greatest and most constant efforts ought to be brought to bear upon the angels of your own category, Arcade, the guardian angels, who dwell upon earth in such great numbers. They fill the lowest ranks of the hierarchy, are for the most part discontented with their lot, and more or less imbued with the ideas of the present century. She had already conferred with the guardian angels of Montmartre, 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 Clignancourt, and Phyllis du Calvaire. She had devised the plan of a vast association of spirits on earth with the view of conquering heaven. To accomplish this task, she said, I have established myself in France, but not because I had the folly to believe myself freer in a republic than a monarchy. Quite the contrary, for there is no country where the liberty of the individual is less respected than in France. But the people are indifferent to everything connected with religion. Nowhere else, therefore, should I enjoy such tranquility. She invited Arcade to unite his efforts to hers, and when they separated at the door of the brazier, the steel shutter was already making its groaning descent. Above all, said Zita, you must meet the gardener. I will take you to his rustic home one day. Théophile, who had slumbered during all this talk, begged his friend to come home with him and smoke a cigarette. He lived quite near in the small street opposite, leading off the boulevard. Arcade would see Bochot. She would please him. They climbed up 5 flights of stairs. Bochot had not yet returned. A tin of sardines lay open on the piano. Red stockings coiled about the armchairs. It's a little place, but it's comfortable, said Théophile. And gazing out of the window which looked out on the rust-colored night, with its myriad lights, he added, one can see the Sacré-Cœur. His hand on Arcade's shoulder, he repeated several times, I'm glad to see you. Then dragging his former companion in glory into the kitchen passage, he put down his candlestick, drew a key from his pocket, opened a cupboard, and raising a linen covering, disclosed 2 large white wings. You see, he said, I have preserved them. From time to time, when I am alone, I go and look at them. It does me good. And he dabbled his reddened eyes. He stood a while, overcome by silent emotion. Then, holding the candle near the long pinions, which were molting their down in places, he murmured, They are eaten away. You must put some pepper on them, said Arcade. I have done so, replied the angelic musician, sighing. I have put pepper, camphor, and powder on them, but nothing does any good. And I'm reminded of on that show Lucifer that was on Fox. He'd have his wings and he'd keep his wings separate and all that stuff. But so how did Christianity fall? That's sort of the question here, right? Well, Christianity kind of fell. People can like adjust their intellect for the thing. They reinterpret the myths and all that sort of stuff. So that's not always the best approach, but it works with some people in some ways. And of course, it isn't about, Christianity. Of course, this being a French book, Catholicism and secularism was, sort of the only ways. So that was that. So this is the guise in which this has to be. But the fall of Christianity, like for example, in my country, it was more about redirecting the tastes. Once people developed habits and likings, particularly ones that aren't necessary, and their attachments to others, which may have deviated in one way or another, that is sort of how to lead people away more than anything, I would think.